I'm Pierre Henkart, and I'd like to tell you about a recent trip I made on the topsail schooner PRIDE of Baltimore II. PRIDE is a guest crew program that allows you to join its 12 professional sailors during their various voyages, and I've done this about a dozen times over the years. My 2023 trip is shown on this map, going from Baltimore in the lower left to Gloucester, Massachusetts in the upper right. I'm showing our path under power in dashed lines with our sailing in solid lines. I went aboard PRIDE in the early evening and got reacquainted with the crew, and met my fellow guest crew shipmates for this trip during our orientation briefing by bosun Taylor Metvin. Then I unpacked my gear in one of the guest crew cabins, after which I spent a pleasant night in my comfortable berth while we were still tied to the pier. Early the next morning, the crew was making the boat ready for departure, and I found bosun Taylor out on the new jib boom adjusting the control lines for the jib and jib topsail. I was assigned to the 8 to 12 watch, and Taylor was my watch leader, so you're going to see her again. We left our pier and motored down the Patapsco River out into the Chesapeake, with the crew adjusting sails out on the jib boom. With light winds forecast, Captain Miles described our plan as motoring up the Chesapeake to the C&D Canal and then down the Delaware Bay to the ocean, where good winds were forecast for the following day. That afternoon found us motoring through the C&D Canal, along with other traffic, including this empty tanker headed towards the Chesapeake. After entering the upper Delaware Bay, we headed south towards the ocean, motoring all through my 8 to 12 evening watch. When I woke up in the morning, the 4 to 8 watch had started putting up the sails as we got out into the ocean. We had a 12-knot southerly wind that would stay with us for most of the next 2 days. Up on deck for my watch at 8 a.m., we were headed towards Cape Cod on a broad reach with a moderate following sea, wonderful relaxed sailing at 7 to 8 knots. We had 5 sails set forward, starting with the gaff foresail and our square foretopsail. Then the staysail and the 2 jibs up front. PRIDE was being pulled nicely by those 5 forward sails, with the mainsail still furled on the boom. Here you can see Taylor with her sextant getting a morning sun sight, with deckhand Emerson Jones at the helm. Our morning watch was easy, with a 1-hour stint at the helm and regular hourly boat checks, setting a pattern that continued for this whole day and the following night. We spent all day on our east-northeast course, going 7 to 8 knots. During the afternoon watch, we were joined for a while by a pod of dolphins riding our bow wave. Historically, sailors have always welcomed the company of dolphins, and they seemed to be enjoying the interaction as much as we did. Here's veteran deckhand Tanith Anheuser out on the head rig experiencing a close encounter. After the dolphins left, we kept rolling along under these great conditions all afternoon and throughout my 8 to 12 evening watch. Waking up the next morning, we found our speed and course had continued all night, and here after breakfast you're seeing Captain Miles on the rail discussing plans for the day with Taylor. Engineer Mary Walker's at the helm, and second mate Cyrus Belenke is behind. Our course had been set to take us around Cape Cod and then up to Gloucester, but updated weather forecasts now predicted diminishing winds during the afternoon, and Captain Miles decided to shorten our route by going up Buzzards Bay and through the Cape Cod Canal. That meant changing our course to the north and a jibe over onto Port Tack for our southeast wind. Jibing can be a tricky maneuver, turning the ship so that the wind passes over the stern with the sails changing sides while still filled. With the wind behind us, that big gaff foresail was flattened out and then brought over, followed by the staysail and jibs. The square foretopsail was braced around, all of which required some strong coordinated pulling from the crew, with a downward sweating technique used for the tightest trim at the end. All of this was carried out over the course of about 15 minutes, well orchestrated by Captain Miles and the mates, with enthusiastic participation by guest crew members. All that jibing activity was a contrast to the previous 24 hours of rolling along with no sail adjustments. Now we are headed straight to the entrance of Buzzards Bay, still making 7 knots on our new course. But as the day wore on, the wind diminished in the afternoon as forecast, and approaching the Elizabeth Islands brought us some haze and spotty fog. With the objective of getting through the Cape Cod Canal with a favorable current behind us, we turned on the engines before entering Buzzards Bay. At the northern end of the bay, we transited the canal with a current behind us and emerged into Cape Cod Bay as the sun was setting behind increasing cloud. There was minimal wind, so we continued motoring across to Provincetown at the tip of Cape Cod. We anchored before midnight just outside the Provincetown breakwater, and after this long day, we had a quiet night's sleep. The next day was the 4th of July, and here we were in a famous party town with time for a day off, as we weren't due in Gloucester for 2 days. So we got to enjoy Provincetown's 4th of July activities, which are a little different from others I've seen, but did include fireworks. The next morning we found ourselves in fog, but it was lifting after breakfast as we raised the anchor. Pride's anchor weighs 750 pounds and there's a lot of chain, so you're looking at a real workout for the crew. Gloucester's about 40 miles from Provincetown, and the wind was still light, so we motored around Cape Cod's hook and headed straight for Gloucester. We arrived at the entrance to Gloucester Harbor in mid-afternoon, greeted by one of the local schooners that was part of the weekend Schooner Festival, celebrating the 400th anniversary of the arrival of Gloucester's first English settlers. Located near the end of Cape Ann and productive fishing grounds, Gloucester-built schooners went out fishing New England's local waters and offshore banks up until the mid-20th century. Gloucester's 10-foot tides and rocky shorelines are a striking contrast to the Chesapeake. Here we're looking out from our berth, where we watched eider ducks diving for mussels on the rocks about 15 feet from our bow. The next morning it was time for the guest crew to leave, as Pride had deck tours scheduled as part of the Schooner Festival. For the 4 of us, it was a memorable trip, particularly the glorious 2-day ocean sail. Being part of Pride's crew, even for 5 days, was a chance to reenact the centuries of sailing history that was being celebrated in Gloucester this weekend. That trip to Gloucester was one of many opportunities offered by the PRIDE of Baltimore II guest crew program. If you're interested in joining Pride for a trip like this, check out the guest crew page on Pride's website. You'll find a schedule of future opportunities and details for signing up. You can also see a couple of other videos of past guest crew voyages I've done on Pride, which will give you some idea of why I keep coming back for more. And I'm always hoping for fair winds and following seas like you saw here.